By 2038, every step you take in a city could be recorded, analyzed, and monetized. And most people won't even notice it's happening.
The technology already exists. Sensor networks in cities like Singapore and Barcelona are tracking millions of data points every second.
And here's what's concerning. A 2024 MIT study found that 92% of smart city residents have no idea how much data is collected about them daily.
I visited Songdo in South Korea last year. Every trash can, every lamppost, every bench watching recording, and people just walked by like it was normal.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. Because this isn't some distant sci-fi scenario anymore. The infrastructure is being built right now.
Right. And the interesting part is, it's not being built by governments alone. It's tech companies, data brokers, city planners, all working together in ways that blur accountability.
Which raises the big question. When does a smart city become a surveillance city? Where's that line?
Today we're exploring what life might actually look like in 2038, when these systems are fully integrated. How tracking works, who benefits, who loses, and whether we can have convenience without sacrificing autonomy.
Yeah, and honestly, some of the trade-offs are way more complicated than people realize, because it's not just good versus bad.
Exactly. There are real benefits here, but there are also risks that could fundamentally change how we live. So let's start with the basics. Adrian, what exactly makes a city smart?
Okay, so a smart city is it's a city that uses connected sensors and AI to manage resources and services more efficiently. Think traffic lights that adjust in real time, waste management systems that optimize collection routes, energy grids that predict demand.
Right. And the foundation of all this is data. Massive amounts of data collected continuously from IoT devices, Internet of Things. We're talking billions of sensors embedded in infrastructure. A 2023 Gartner report projected that by 2030, the average smart city would have over 10,000 sensors per square mile.
10,000 sensors per square mile. Let that sink in for a second.
And that was the 2030 projection. By 2038, we're probably looking at exponentially more. Plus, the sensors themselves are getting smaller, cheaper, more sophisticated.
Iris, walk us through what these sensors actually track. Because I think most people hear smart city and think, I don't know, efficient bus schedules or something.
Well, that's part of it, but it goes way deeper. Current smart city infrastructure tracks pedestrian movement patterns, vehicle traffic including license plates, air quality, noise levels, waste production, water usage, energy consumption. Facial recognition cameras are standard in cities like London and Beijing. Then you have smartphone data, your location, your spending patterns, your social connections.
And all of this data doesn't just sit there. It gets analyzed by AI systems that look for patterns, make predictions, and increasingly make decisions.
Yeah, like there was this case in 2023 in a European city, I can't remember which one, where the smart grid started automatically reducing power to certain neighborhoods during peak hours based on, quote, usage optimization algorithms. But when people dug into it, the algorithm was basically targeting lower income areas.
So the system encoded existing inequalities.
Exactly, and nobody had voted on it. It just happened because the system was designed to be efficient, and efficiency doesn't care about fairness unless you explicitly program it to.
Which brings up a critical point. These systems are built on assumptions. Someone decides what gets measured, what gets optimized, what the goals are. And those decisions have massive downstream effects.
Historically, we've seen this pattern repeat. When London introduced extensive CCTV networks in the 1990s, it was sold as crime prevention. And crime did drop in some areas. But studies from King's College London in 2019 showed that certain communities, particularly minority communities, experienced over-policing as a result.
Because the data told police where to focus.
Right. But the data was biased from the start because those neighborhoods were already being watched more closely. So you get this feedback loop where surveillance justifies more surveillance.
Oof, and by 2038, we're not just talking cameras, we're talking sensor fusion, where multiple data sources get combined to create incredibly detailed profiles of individuals.
Exactly. So you might have, let's say, transit data showing when you leave home, retail sensors tracking where you shop, smartphone data showing who you meet, health sensors monitoring your vitals if you're wearing any kind of wearable device. Combine all that, and AI can predict your behavior with scary accuracy.
Okay, but let's talk about the optimistic case here, because there are real benefits, right? Elias, you've looked at the urban planning research.
Totally. I mean, the potential is significant. Cities are responsible for about 70% of global carbon emissions according to UN Habitat data. Smart systems could reduce that dramatically. Traffic optimization alone could cut urban emissions by 15 to 20% based on pilot programs in Copenhagen and Amsterdam.
Right, and then you have emergency response. Barcelona's smart city system reduced emergency response times by 24% between 2018 and 2023. That translates to lives saved. Resource management is another big one. Singapore reduced water waste by 18% using smart meters and leak detection.
And honestly, some of the convenience factors they're pretty appealing. Imagine never sitting in traffic because the system routes you perfectly. Never circling for parking because your car knows exactly where spots are available. Seamless public transit that actually works.
So what's the catch? Because I'm hearing a lot of benefits, but clearly there's a dark side here.
The catch is control and transparency, or lack of it. A 2024 report from the Electronic Frontier Foundation found that most smart city data sharing agreements between cities and tech companies are confidential. Citizens don't know what data is collected, how long it's stored, who has access to it, or what it's used for.
And that's by design, because if people knew the full extent of tracking, there might be pushback. So it gets rolled out incrementally, piece by piece, each step seeming reasonable on its own.
It's like the frog in boiling water metaphor. You don't notice because it happens gradually.
Daphne, you mentioned your experience in Songdo. What was that like on the ground?
It was surreal, honestly. So Songdo is this planned smart city in South Korea, been in development since 2004. And on the surface, it's beautiful. Clean, efficient, everything works. But there's this underlying feeling of being watched. Every public space has sensors. Your apartment monitors your energy and water use. The waste system knows what you throw away, and people they live with it because it's normal to them. They grew up with it or they moved there knowing that's how it works.
Did you talk to residents about privacy concerns?
I did, yeah, and the responses were mixed. Younger people especially didn't seem bothered. They saw it as a trade-off for convenience and safety. Older residents, some of them had reservations but felt like, what can you do? It's the future.
That resignation is concerning, because once these systems are embedded in infrastructure, they're incredibly hard to remove or reform. You're essentially locked into the architecture.
Let's talk about 2038 specifically. What does the trajectory look like? If current trends continue, what kind of tracking are we looking at?
Okay, so based on current development patterns and technology advancement rates, here's what's likely. First, ubiquitous biometric identification. Facial recognition is already standard, but by 2038, we're probably looking at gait analysis. That's recognizing people by how they walk, voice recognition in public spaces, potentially even emotional state detection through microexpression analysis.
Wait, emotional state detection?
Yeah, it's already being tested. China's been experimenting with it in schools and workplaces since 2019. The idea is cameras can read facial expressions and body language to determine stress levels, happiness, engagement, whatever. Marketed as wellness monitoring, but obviously the implications are huge.
Wow. That's a whole other level of invasive.
What else?
Predictive policing becomes more sophisticated. Not just where crime might happen, but who might commit it. You start seeing systems that flag individuals as high risk based on behavior patterns, social connections, even things like sleep patterns or spending habits.
That sounds like Minority Report.
It does, but it's not science fiction anymore. Pilot programs exist in several US cities right now. They're controversial and often challenged legally, but the technology exists and it's being refined.
Okay, so let's ground this in something concrete. What does a typical day look like for someone living in a fully smart city in 2038? Walk me through it.
All right, so picture this. You wake up and your smart home has already adjusted the temperature, lighting, water temperature for your shower based on your sleep patterns and biometric data. That data gets logged. You leave your apartment and the building's security system logs your exit time, what you're wearing if there's visual recognition, your gait pattern.
And you don't even think about it because it's just normal. It's been that way for years at that point.
Right. You walk to the subway. Every corner has sensors tracking pedestrian flow. Your phone is pinging cell towers, connecting to Wi-Fi networks, even if you're not actively using it. That creates a continuous location trail. You tap your transit card or phone to enter the subway. That's another data point. The cameras on the platform use facial recognition to verify your identity, cross-reference it with your payment method.
And this is all happening in seconds. You're not standing there scanning your face deliberately. The system just knows who you are.
Because it's designed to be frictionless.
Exactly. Convenience means you don't notice the tracking. That's the whole point.
So you ride the subway. Cameras inside the train are monitoring passenger behavior, looking for anomalies, security threats, whatever the parameters are. You get off at your stop, walk to work. More cameras, more sensors. You enter your office building, biometric scan to get in. Your work computer logs when you arrive, tracks your activity throughout the day. Keystroke patterns, websites visited, time spent on tasks, even your break patterns.
And that's not hypothetical. That level of workplace surveillance exists right now in 2025. Companies like Amazon have been doing versions of this for years with their warehouse workers.
Exactly. By 2038, it's just more refined and more widespread. So you take a lunch break. Your phone tracks where you go, how long you stay, what you purchase. If you're in a smart district, there might be sensors analyzing foot traffic patterns, dwell time in front of shop windows, even biometric data if you're wearing any health tech.
And all of this data is being aggregated. That's the key thing people miss. It's not just one company or one system tracking you. It's dozens of systems. And increasingly, they share data or sell it to brokers who compile comprehensive profiles.
So by the end of the day, there's a complete record of everything.
Pretty much. Where you went, who you saw, what you bought, how long you spent in each location, your emotional state potentially, your health metrics if you're wearing a smartwatch or other wearables. And that's just the explicit tracking. Then you have inference.
Inference?
Yeah, so inference is when AI uses the data it has to predict or deduce things you haven't explicitly shared. Like if you visit a certain medical clinic, the system might infer you have a specific health condition. If you meet regularly with certain people, it infers your social network and can make assumptions about your beliefs, politics, whatever.
Honestly, that's the part that freaks me out the most. Because it's not just about privacy in terms of what you choose to share. It's about the system knowing things about you that you haven't consented to share, that you might not even be aware of yourself.
And historically, we've seen how dangerous that kind of information asymmetry can be. When institutions know more about individuals than individuals know about themselves, power becomes deeply imbalanced.
Let's talk about who controls this data, because I think that's a huge question. Is it governments? Corporations? Both?
It's both, and that's part of what makes it so complex. The infrastructure is usually a public-private partnership. The city owns the physical infrastructure, the streets, the buildings, but private companies provide the technology, the sensors, the AI systems, the data analysis. And the agreements between them are usually murky.
There was a major case in Toronto in 2020. Google's Sidewalk Labs wanted to build a smart district along the waterfront. But when citizens and activists started digging into the data governance structure, they found that Sidewalk Labs would have essentially owned all the data generated by residents. There was massive pushback, and eventually the project was canceled.
But that was because people found out and organized. How many smart city projects go through without that level of scrutiny?
Most of them. The Toronto case was an exception because it was high profile and there were well-organized advocacy groups paying attention.
So in 2038, assuming these systems are fully deployed, who has access to this data?
Okay, so typically you'd have the city government with access for urban planning, emergency services, traffic management, that sort of thing. Then you have law enforcement, which is obviously controversial, private companies that built and maintain the systems, third-party contractors who analyze the data, and then depending on the agreements, data brokers who purchase aggregated or anonymized data.
Anonymized in air quotes, right? Because we know from multiple studies that anonymized data can be de-anonymized pretty easily.
Right. A 2019 study from Imperial College London showed that 99.9% of Americans could be re-identified from supposedly anonymized datasets using just 15 demographic attributes. So anonymization is kind of a fig leaf.
And even if the data is truly anonymized at the individual level, aggregate data is still incredibly valuable and can be used in ways that impact communities. Like if data shows certain neighborhoods have higher crime rates or lower property values or whatever, that affects insurance rates, loan approvals, investment decisions.
Elias, you've mentioned historical parallels a few times. Are there precedents for this kind of comprehensive tracking?
I mean, not at this scale or with this technology, but the impulse is nothing new. Governments and institutions have always wanted to monitor populations. Census data, for example, has been used both for resource allocation and for control. In the US during World War II, census data was used to identify and locate Japanese Americans for internment, which is a pretty stark example of how data collection can be weaponized.
Oh yeah, and that was with primitive technology by today's standards. Just paper records and manual cross-referencing.
Exactly. So imagine what's possible now with AI and real-time data processing. The potential for abuse is exponentially higher, but also the potential for benefit is higher too. It's not inherently good or bad, it's about governance, accountability, consent.
Let's dig into consent for a second, because I feel like that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but in practice it's pretty hollow. Like, can you really consent to smart city tracking?
That's such an important question. Because theoretically, yes, cities could get consent from residents. But in practice, if the infrastructure is already built and everyone around you is part of the system, do you really have a choice?
This is called the collective action problem. As an individual, opting out might be possible in theory, but it comes with such high costs that it's not really a viable option. You might not be able to access public services, use transit, even enter certain buildings if you're not part of the system.
And there's social pressure too. If everyone else is participating and the system is designed around that participation, you become the outlier, the weirdo who doesn't trust technology or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, same thing happened with smartphones. Technically, nobody forced us to carry them, but try navigating modern life without one. It's possible, but it's incredibly difficult and you're excluded from so much.
So by 2038, opting out of smart city tracking would be like, what, living off the grid basically?
Pretty much. And even then, you'd still show up in other people's data. If someone takes a photo in a public space and uploads it, you might be in the background. Facial recognition could still identify you. License plate readers would still catch your car if you drive.
There's this concept in privacy research called ambient surveillance. Even if you're not directly participating in surveillance systems, you're still caught in the ambient data generated by everyone and everything around you.
That's kind of terrifying when you think about it. You can't escape the system even if you try. But let's play devil's advocate here for a minute. Iris, you mentioned earlier that there are genuine benefits. Better emergency response, reduced emissions, improved services. Are those benefits real enough to justify the tracking?
That's the trillion-dollar question, honestly. Because the benefits are real. I don't want to dismiss them. Cities using smart systems have demonstrably better outcomes in certain areas. But the question isn't just whether benefits exist, it's whether they require this level of tracking and whether we can achieve them with better privacy protections.
Right, like, do you need to know my individual identity to optimize traffic flow? Or can you do it with aggregated anonymous data?
Exactly. A lot of smart city functions could work with differential privacy techniques, where data is mathematically altered to protect individuals while still being useful for analysis. But that requires more sophisticated implementation, and there's less commercial incentive because granular personal data is more valuable.
So it's partly a business model problem. The companies building these systems make more money from detailed personal data than from privacy-preserving alternatives.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue. The economic incentives are misaligned with privacy interests. Data is called the new oil for a reason. It's incredibly valuable. Companies that can collect, analyze, and sell detailed personal data have a massive advantage.
Okay, so let's talk about the economic angle more. Who's making money off this, and how?
Well, there are several layers. First, you have the infrastructure companies. Think Cisco, Siemens, Huawei, companies that build the actual sensor networks and IoT systems. They sell hardware and services to cities for billions of dollars. A 2023 McKinsey report estimated the global smart city market would reach $2.5 trillion by 2030.
$2.5 trillion, that's insane.
And that's just the infrastructure. Then you have the software and AI companies that analyze the data. Google, Microsoft, IBM, plus dozens of specialized firms. They provide the platforms that make sense of all the sensor data.
Then there's the data broker industry. These are companies most people have never heard of that aggregate data from multiple sources and sell it. They might purchase anonymized transit data from a city, combine it with retail data, social media data, credit card data, and create comprehensive profiles that they sell to advertisers, insurers, employers, whoever.
And that's legal?
In most places, yes. The regulations vary by jurisdiction, but in general, if data is anonymized or if you've agreed to terms of service somewhere, it's fair game. And terms of service are usually so long and complex that nobody actually reads them.
It's like we've collectively agreed to this system without really understanding what we agreed to. Because it happened incrementally over decades, and each individual step seemed harmless.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it works. There's a term for this in sociology: normalization of surveillance. Each generation accepts a little more tracking than the previous one because it's always been part of their lived experience.
So by 2038, people who grow up in smart cities won't even think of tracking as surveillance. It'll just be how cities work.
Probably. And that's concerning from a civil liberties perspective, because once you lose the cultural memory of privacy, it's very hard to get it back.
That hits different. Because my parents' generation still remembers life before the internet. My generation remembers life before smartphones. But kids being born now? They're growing up in a world where tracking is omnipresent. They won't have a reference point for anything else.
Which is why the decisions we make now, in the 2020s and 2030s, are so critical. We're setting the defaults for how these systems will work for decades. If we build privacy into the architecture now, future generations benefit. If we don't, they inherit a surveillance infrastructure that's incredibly difficult to reform.
Let's talk about reform then. Are there models for doing smart cities differently? Places that have managed to balance innovation with privacy?
Yeah, actually, Amsterdam has been a leader in this. They developed something called the Tata Manifesto in 2020, which is basically a framework for ethical data use in smart cities. It emphasizes transparency, accountability, consent, and regular audits. They've also been experimenting with data trusts, where citizen representatives have a say in how data is collected and used.
Barcelona is another interesting case. They actually rolled back some of their smart city infrastructure in the late 2010s and early 2020s because of privacy concerns. They implemented a data sovereignty policy where the city retains ownership of data and limits sharing with private companies.
So it is possible to do this differently.
It is, but it requires political will, public engagement, and usually some kind of catalyst. Barcelona's shift happened partly because of citizen activism, and partly because of leadership that prioritized privacy. Most cities don't have that combination of factors.
What about legal frameworks? Are there regulations that could prevent the worst-case scenarios?
The EU's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, was a step in that direction. It gives individuals more control over their personal data, requires explicit consent for certain types of processing, mandates data portability. But GDPR was designed for the internet age, not necessarily for ubiquitous physical surveillance.
Right, and enforcement is a challenge. GDPR has teeth in theory. Companies can be fined up to 4% of global revenue for violations. But actually investigating and prosecuting violations requires resources and expertise that many regulatory agencies don't have.
Yeah. And by 2038, the technology will have evolved so much that current regulations will probably seem quaint. Like, GDPR doesn't really address AI inference, emotion detection, predictive analytics, all the things that will be standard in smart cities.
So we need new frameworks.
We definitely need new frameworks. Some researchers are advocating for what they call data dignity or data rights movements. The idea is that data generated by individuals should be treated like property or labor. You should have the right to control it, profit from it, or withhold it.
There's also the concept of algorithmic accountability. If AI systems are making decisions that affect people's lives, there should be transparency about how those systems work, auditing to ensure they're not discriminatory or biased, and avenues for appeal when decisions are wrong.
Amir knew how? That makes sense in theory, but how do you actually implement that? Algorithms are complex, often proprietary. Companies claim they're trade secrets.
That's the challenge. There's a tension between transparency and commercial interests. Some jurisdictions are starting to require algorithmic impact assessments for government systems, similar to environmental impact assessments. But extending that to private sector systems is harder.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Daphne, you mentioned earlier that some of the trade-offs are more complicated than people realize. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's okay, so everyone talks about surveillance and privacy as if they're black and white. Either you have privacy or you don't. But in practice, it's way more nuanced. There are situations where I personally would trade some privacy for convenience or safety, and situations where I absolutely wouldn't. And the line is different for everyone.
Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say I'm walking home late at night in an area that's not super safe. In that moment, I might actually feel more secure knowing there are cameras around, that someone could review footage if something happened to me. That's a very different context than, having cameras in my apartment or tracking my location when I'm just going about my daily life.
So context matters. That's interesting, because I think a lot of the discourse around surveillance assumes everyone wants the same thing. But people have different threat models, different priorities.
Absolutely. And that's actually backed up by research. A 2022 Pew study found that people's attitudes towards surveillance vary significantly based on who's doing the watching and why. People are generally more comfortable with government surveillance for public safety than corporate surveillance for advertising, for example.
But the problem is, in a smart city, those lines blur. the same infrastructure serves multiple purposes. A camera network installed for traffic management can also be used for law enforcement, which can also feed data to commercial entities through data sharing agreements.
Right, and you don't necessarily know when your data crosses from one use case to another. It's not like you get a notification that says, hey, your transit data just got sold to an insurance company to assess your risk profile.
Wait, that happens?
It can. I mean, there have been documented cases of data brokers selling location data to insurers. It's not always transit data specifically, but it's usually phone location data, which it's the same thing basically. They can infer where you go, how often, your lifestyle patterns.
And that feeds into pricing algorithms. If the data suggests you frequently visit high-risk areas or have irregular sleep patterns or whatever other factors they deem relevant, you might pay higher premiums without ever knowing why.
That's the invisible discrimination problem. Algorithmic decisions that affect your life, but you can't see the reasoning, can't challenge the data, can't even know it's happening.
So even if you're okay with cameras for safety, you might not be okay with that same data being used to charge you more for insurance.
Exactly. And you don't get to choose. That's the thing. It's all or nothing. Either you participate in the smart city ecosystem with all its interconnected uses, or you opt out entirely, which we've already established isn't really practical.
Although there are some people trying to develop technical countermeasures, like ways to exist in a smart city while minimizing your data footprint.
Oh, this is interesting. What kind of countermeasures?
Well, some are pretty low tech. Things like paying with cash instead of cards, leaving your phone at home or in a Faraday bag that blocks signals, wearing clothing that interferes with facial recognition. There are patterns and accessories designed specifically for this.
There's a whole subculture around anti-surveillance fashion. Reflective materials that confuse cameras, makeup patterns that disrupt facial recognition algorithms, even hairstyles and accessories designed to obscure identifying features.
I saw a demonstration of this at a tech conference. Someone wore these glasses with LED lights that just completely scrambled facial recognition. It was wild, but also kind of dystopian that we need countermeasures like this.
On the digital side, there are more sophisticated approaches. Using VPNs to mask your internet activity, encrypted messaging apps, privacy-focused operating systems, tools that generate fake location data or browsing patterns to pollute your profile.
But realistically, how many people are going to do all that? It sounds exhausting.
Right, and that's the point, in a way. The burden of protecting privacy falls on individuals, and it requires constant vigilance and technical knowledge that most people don't have. It shouldn't be this hard.
Historically, privacy protections came from legal and social norms, not from individuals having to be security experts. You had a right to privacy in your home because there were laws against trespassing and wiretapping. You didn't have to build a Faraday cage around your house.
But now we're carrying surveillance devices voluntarily, living in spaces filled with sensors, and we're expected to just manage it ourselves somehow.
Let's talk about the people who won't manage it, who can't. Because I'm thinking about marginalized communities, people who don't have the resources or knowledge to protect themselves. What happens to them in a fully tracked smart city?
That's a critical question. Smart cities tend to amplify existing inequalities. If you're already in a vulnerable position, undocumented immigrants, people with criminal records, religious or ethnic minorities, activists, comprehensive tracking becomes a threat multiplier.
A 2023 Human Rights Watch report looked at this specifically in the context of China's smart cities. They found that surveillance infrastructure was disproportionately deployed in Xinjiang province, where the Uyghur population lives, and was used to monitor, control, and suppress that community. The technology itself was neutral, but its deployment was anything but.
And that can happen anywhere. The infrastructure doesn't have to be built with discriminatory intent for it to be used that way later. Once the capability exists, it's a question of who controls it and what their goals are.
So by 2038, if these systems are everywhere, the stakes are much higher for certain groups.
Definitely. And it's not just about government oppression. Even in democratic contexts, data can be weaponized. Think about domestic violence situations. If an abuser has access to their victim's location data through shared accounts or family tracking apps, that's incredibly dangerous. Scale that up to city-level tracking, and the risks multiply.
Oof, I hadn't even thought about that dimension. But yeah, location tracking in the wrong hands is a safety threat, not a safety feature.
There's also the issue of data breaches. The more data that's collected and stored, the bigger the target for hackers. A 2024 study estimated that the average cost of a data breach was over $4 million for companies. But for individuals whose data is compromised, the costs can be much higher: identity theft, fraud, personal safety risks.
And smart city databases would be huge targets.
Massive targets. You'd have centralized databases with information on millions of people. That's incredibly valuable to criminal organizations, hostile governments, whoever. And we've seen repeatedly that even well-resourced organizations struggle with cybersecurity. Equifax, Target, Marriott all had major breaches in the 2010s and 2020s.
So you're trusting that the people managing smart city infrastructure have perfect security, which history suggests that's not realistic.
And even if they do their best, technology fails. Systems get hacked, employees make mistakes or act maliciously. It's not a question of if a major smart city data breach happens, it's when.
That's pretty bleak. Okay, let's try to end this section on a slightly more hopeful note. Are there ways to build resilience, either as individuals or communities?
I think community organizing is actually really important here. The cases where smart city projects were reformed or canceled, like Toronto's sidewalk labs, happened because of organized citizen action. People paying attention, asking questions, demanding transparency, showing up to city council meetings.
Right, and that requires civic engagement. Democracy doesn't autopilot. If people aren't involved in decisions about urban technology, those decisions get made by default, usually in favor of whoever has the most resources and influence.
I also think there's value in building alternative systems. Community-owned networks, cooperative data trusts, local initiatives that prioritize privacy and shared governance. They might not scale to full smart city infrastructure, but they create models and prove that different approaches are possible.
So it's not hopeless, but it requires active participation.
Exactly. The future of smart cities isn't predetermined. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make, the systems we build, the norms we establish. And that means there's still time to influence it.
Let's get into some of the more speculative aspects. We've talked about tracking as it exists now and where it's headed, but what are some of the wildcard scenarios, things that could accelerate or derail this trajectory?
Oh, there are several. One big wildcard is climate change. As cities face more extreme weather events, floods, heat waves, wildfires, there's going to be pressure to build more monitoring infrastructure for emergency management. And that infrastructure, once it's in place, doesn't go away when the emergency ends.
Right, we saw this pattern after September 11th. Surveillance infrastructure deployed for counterterrorism became permanent. The Patriot Act provisions that were supposed to be temporary got extended repeatedly. Crisis creates opportunity for expansion of monitoring systems.
And climate crises are going to be ongoing. It's not like one event and then it's over, so that justification for enhanced surveillance will be perpetual.
That's a really good point. What else?
Artificial intelligence advancement is a huge variable. If AI capabilities continue improving at current rates, by 2038 we're looking at systems that can analyze and predict human behavior with accuracy that makes current technology look primitive. We might have AI that can detect lies, predict crime before it happens with high accuracy, identify mental health issues from behavioral patterns.
Which raises the question, at what point does prediction become predetermination? If a system says you're likely to commit a crime and you get flagged or restricted because of it, does that create a self-fulfilling prophecy?
That's straight out of Philip K. Dick, but it's not fiction anymore.
No, it's not. And the accuracy doesn't even have to be perfect for these systems to be deployed. If they're right 70% of the time, that might be considered good enough by policymakers, even though it means 30% of people are being wrongly flagged.
What about pushback? Could there be a major backlash against surveillance that reverses the trend?
It's possible. We've seen privacy movements gain momentum in the 2020s. GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, growing awareness of digital rights. If that continues and translates into political action, you could see stricter regulations, mandatory privacy protections, even dismantling of certain surveillance systems.
But it would take something big, I think. Like a major scandal, a data breach that exposes millions of people, or surveillance being used in a way that's so egregious it sparks mass outrage.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's often how regulatory change happens. Not proactively, but reactively after harm has been done. We saw this with social media, and mental health took years of documented harm before there was serious regulatory discussion.
So we might need a smart city disaster to wake people up.
Possibly, although I hope not, because depending on the nature of the disaster, the damage could be irreversible for the people affected.
What about economic factors? Could the smart city model become financially unsustainable?
That's an interesting angle. The infrastructure is expensive to build and maintain. If cities don't see the return on investment they were promised, or if the systems break down and require constant, costly repairs, that could slow adoption. There are already examples of smart city pilot projects that failed because they couldn't deliver on their promises or costs spiraled.
And there's the risk of vendor lock-in. Cities sign long-term contracts with technology companies, then find they're dependent on proprietary systems that are expensive to upgrade or replace. That creates resentment and could lead to more cautious approaches.
Okay, let's talk about something we've sort of danced around but haven't directly addressed. What about authoritarian uses? We mentioned China briefly, but what's the worst-case scenario here?
The worst case is a government or corporate entity using comprehensive surveillance to create a system of total control. Social credit systems, where your behavior is constantly monitored and rated, affecting your ability to travel, get jobs, access services. Predictive policing that targets dissidents before they act. Automated systems that suppress protest or free speech in real time.
China's social credit system is often cited as an example, though it's worth noting it's more fragmented and less dystopian than Western media sometimes portrays. But the principle is there, using data to reward compliance and punish nonconformity.
And the scariest part is how normalized it can become. If you grow up in that system, it's just how things work. You internalize the surveillance, modify your behavior to fit what the system rewards. It's not even conscious after a while.
That's what Foucault called the panopticon effect. When you know you're being watched, or might be watched, you police yourself. The surveillance doesn't even have to be constant. The possibility of surveillance is enough to shape behavior.
So even if the data isn't actively being monitored all the time, the fact that it could be is enough to control people.
Exactly. And that's incredibly efficient from a power perspective. You don't need agents watching everyone, just the infrastructure and the knowledge that monitoring is possible.
God, that's so insidious, because it means the control is internalized. You're not even being directly coerced, you're coercing yourself.
Although it's worth noting that humans are also remarkably adaptable and creative at resisting control. Throughout history, people have found ways to subvert surveillance systems. Dead drops, coded language, underground networks. The technology changes, but the cat and mouse game continues.
So there's always resistance.
There's always resistance. Whether it's effective depends on a lot of factors, but the impulse to resist control is pretty fundamental to human nature.
And sometimes resistance doesn't even look like resistance from the outside. It might be subtle, using systems in unintended ways, exploiting gaps in monitoring, creating informal social structures that operate outside official channels.
I think about this a lot with younger generations. Like Gen Z and Gen Alpha have grown up with surveillance as normal, but they're also incredibly savvy about navigating digital systems. They understand how algorithms work, how to game them, how to create privacy through obscurity.
Privacy through obscurity?
Yeah, like posting so much content that the meaningful stuff gets buried, using multiple personas, creating noise in the data so it's harder to build an accurate profile. It's not traditional privacy, but it's a form of resistance.
There's actually research on this called obfuscation, deliberately providing misleading information or overwhelming systems with noise to protect privacy. It's labor-intensive, but it can be effective.
The question is whether that remains viable as AI gets better at filtering signal from noise. Eventually, obfuscation might require so much effort that it's not sustainable for most people.
So we're in an arms race. Surveillance technology versus privacy technology.
We are, and historically, surveillance tends to have more resources behind it because there's economic and political incentive. Privacy protection is usually grassroots, underfunded, reactive.
Which is why legal and political frameworks are so important, because individuals can't win that arms race alone. We need systemic protection.
I want to dig into something that's been on my mind. We keep talking about smart cities as this monolithic thing, but cities are incredibly diverse. How does this play out differently in, say, a wealthy Western city versus a developing megacity?
That's a crucial distinction. The smart city concept has very different implications depending on context. In wealthy cities like Singapore or Dubai, you have top-down implementation with massive resources, relatively stable governance, and populations that have some level of recourse through legal systems. In megacities in the global south, Lagos, Mumbai, Jakarta, the dynamics are completely different.
Right. In many developing cities, basic infrastructure is still being built. So smart systems get layered on top of informal settlements, incomplete services, and governance structures that might be fragmented or corrupt. That creates unique vulnerabilities.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So let's say you're implementing a smart water system in a city where 40% of residents don't have legal property rights. The system tracks water usage, which could be used to identify informal settlements. That data could then be used for evictions or enforcement against people who are already marginalized.
And there's less accountability. In a city with strong institutions and press freedom, if something like that happens, there's potential for public outcry, journalism, legal challenges. In contexts with weaker institutions or authoritarian tendencies, those checks might not exist.
So the same technology becomes more dangerous in places with less democratic oversight.
Exactly. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by and shapes the political and social context it's deployed in.
What about cities in the middle? Not super wealthy, not extremely poor, just regular cities. How does this affect them by 2038?
Think it's where you see the most variation. It depends so much on local governance, public engagement, resources. A mid-sized European city might have strong privacy protections and citizen input. A similar-sized city in another region might have surveillance infrastructure with minimal oversight.
And there's the competitive pressure. Cities want to attract investment, talent, businesses. Smart city branding becomes part of economic development strategy. So even if there are concerns about privacy, the economic incentives push toward adoption.
It's like, if you don't become a smart city, you risk being left behind economically. So cities feel pressured to implement these systems even if they're not sure about the trade-offs.
That's a really uncomfortable dynamic. Okay, let's shift to something more personal. How should individuals think about this? Like, if someone listening to this is concerned about smart city surveillance, what should they actually do?
Honestly, that's hard to answer because it depends so much on individual circumstances. But I think the first step is awareness. Understanding what data is being collected, who has access, how it's used. Most people have no idea.
Right. And that awareness can inform choices. Maybe you decide to use cash more often, or you turn off location services when you don't need them, or you read privacy policies before agreeing to them. Small actions that incrementally protect privacy.
But I'd also emphasize collective action over individual action. One person protecting their privacy is good, but it doesn't change the system. What changes systems is organized groups demanding better policies, supporting politicians who prioritize privacy, showing up to city planning meetings when smart city proposals are being discussed.
So it's both personal responsibility and civic engagement.
Yeah, and honestly, the civic engagement matters more. Because if the legal and policy frameworks are strong, you don't have to be a privacy expert to be protected. The protections are built in.
Although, I'll be real, civic engagement takes time and energy that a lot of people don't have. If you're working 2 jobs, raising kids, dealing with life, showing up to city council meetings about data governance isn't always feasible.
That's absolutely true, and it points to another inequality issue. The people most affected by surveillance are often the people with least time and resources to fight it, which is why it's important for those who do have capacity to advocate not just for themselves, but for broader protections.
What about voting with your feet? Like, if a city implements pervasive surveillance, could we see people moving to cities with better privacy protections?
It's possible, though historically that kind of migration is limited to people with resources and mobility. And by 2038, if smart city infrastructure is widespread, there might not be many options for cities without it.
It could create a 2-tier system though, privacy-respecting cities that attract a certain demographic, and surveillance-heavy cities that can't attract or retain talent. That economic pressure might actually drive some reform.
Although the flip side is, surveillance cities might be cheaper or offer other benefits that make people willing to trade privacy. We've seen this with apps and services. People choose convenience over privacy all the time.
True. Okay, Iris. You mentioned earlier that the decisions we make now shape the future. What specific decisions or moments should people be paying attention to?
Well, right now, in the mid-2020s, a lot of cities are in the planning or early implementation phases of smart infrastructure. That's when there's the most opportunity for input. Once the infrastructure is built, it's much harder to change. So if your city is considering a smart city initiative, that's the moment to get involved.
Also pay attention to procurement decisions. When cities choose vendors for smart systems, those contracts often include data sharing provisions that aren't well understood by the public. Asking for transparency in those contracts, demanding that data governance be part of the decision criteria, that matters.
And support organizations that are doing this work. Groups like the ACLU, Electronic Frontier Foundation, local digital rights organizations. They're tracking these issues and fighting for protections. They need resources and public support.
What about at the national or international level? Are there policy changes that would make a difference?
Definitely. A federal privacy law in the US would be huge. Right now, it's a patchwork of state laws. National standards would provide baseline protections everywhere. In the EU, strengthening GDPR or creating specific regulations for urban surveillance would help. Internationally, norms around data sovereignty and cross-border data flows are still being negotiated.
And there's the question of whether internet access and digital participation should be treated as public utilities with corresponding protections. If connectivity is essential for participating in modern life, maybe it should be regulated differently than commercial services.
That would be a massive shift though, because right now, most digital infrastructure is privately owned and operated. Making it a public utility would require, I don't even know, nationalization? Heavy regulation?
It's a spectrum. You could have different models. Community-owned networks, public-private partnerships with strong oversight, cooperatives. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Let's talk about the next generation, people who will be adults in 2038. What kind of world are we handing them?
Oof, that's a heavy question. I mean, we're handing them a world where surveillance is normalized, where privacy is something you have to fight for rather than a default right, but also a world with incredible technological capabilities, connectivity, potential for innovation.
The question is whether they'll accept that trade-off or push back against it. Generational attitudes change. Things that seemed inevitable to one generation get questioned by the next.
And they'll have tools and knowledge we don't have yet. Technology evolves, but so do counter-technologies, social movements, legal frameworks. The future isn't written.
But we're writing it now.
We are. Every choice about how to design these systems, every policy decision, every time someone speaks up or stays silent, that shapes what 2038 looks like.
I want to explore something that might sound counterintuitive. Are there scenarios where more data collection could actually lead to better privacy protections? Like, could transparency work both ways?
That's an interesting question. There's a concept called surveillance, which is basically surveillance from below. The idea is that if authorities are watching citizens, citizens should be able to watch authorities. Accountability through mutual visibility.
We've seen glimpses of this with smartphone cameras and police accountability. Body cameras, citizen journalism, recording interactions. That's a form of counter-surveillance that's created some check on power.
But that relies on people having the tools and legal right to record, which isn't guaranteed everywhere. And even where it is legal, there's often pushback. Police unions fighting body camera requirements, laws against filming officers, that kind of thing.
Right, so it's not automatic. Power tends to resist being watched even as it insists on watching others. But in theory, in a truly transparent smart city, all the data collection could flow in multiple directions. Citizens could see how decisions are made, how resources are allocated, whether algorithms are being applied fairly.
Has anyone actually tried to implement that?
There are pilot projects. Taiwan's digital democracy initiatives under Audrey Tang were interesting. They use digital tools to increase government transparency and citizen participation. Not exactly surveillance in the sense we're discussing, but moving toward more symmetrical information flows.
Estonia's e-governance system has some of these features too. Citizens can see who accesses their data and why. There's an audit trail. It's not perfect, but it's more transparent than most systems.
The challenge is, even with transparency, there's still an asymmetry in what you can do with the information. A government or corporation can process massive amounts of data. An individual can't. So even if you can see your data, you can't necessarily understand its implications or contest its use effectively.
So we need intermediaries, organizations that can analyze and advocate.
Yeah, exactly, like data trusts or unions, entities that represent collective interests and have the expertise to negotiate with powerful actors.
Which brings us back to the importance of civil society. Strong, independent organizations that can act as a check on both government and corporate power.
Okay, let's talk about something we haven't touched on much. The environmental impact of all this infrastructure. Smart cities are supposed to be more efficient, but what's the cost of building and maintaining all these sensors and systems?
Oh, that's a really important point. The environmental footprint of digital infrastructure is often invisible but significant. Data centers consume enormous amounts of energy. A 2023 study estimated that by 2030, data centers could account for 8% of global electricity demand.
And that's just the processing and storage side. The sensors themselves require materials, rare earth metals, plastics, electronic components. There's manufacturing, shipping, installation, maintenance, eventual disposal. E-waste is already a massive problem.
So we could end up in a situation where smart cities reduce some environmental impacts like traffic emissions, but increase others like energy consumption and electronic waste.
Exactly. And the net effect depends on how the systems are designed and powered. If data centers run on renewable energy, if sensors are built to last and be recyclable, if systems are optimized for efficiency, then maybe the trade-off is worth it. But if not, we might be solving one problem while creating another.
Are there cities thinking about this?
Some are. Copenhagen's smart city strategy explicitly includes sustainability metrics. They're trying to ensure that digital infrastructure supports their carbon neutrality goals rather than undermining them. But it requires intentional design and ongoing monitoring.
And again, this is where governance matters. If the people making decisions about smart city infrastructure are only thinking about functionality and not about life cycle environmental impact, you get systems that aren't actually sustainable in the long run.
Elias, you're the history guy. Give me some perspective. In the grand sweep of human civilization, how significant is this moment? Are smart cities as transformative as we think they are?
I think they're significant, but maybe not in the way we immediately assume. Every generation thinks their technological moment is uniquely transformative. The printing press, the telegraph, radio, television, the internet, each was seen as world-changing. And they were, but life also continued with a lot of continuity.
So you're saying this might not be as big a deal as we think?
No, I'm saying it's important, but we should be careful about both utopian and dystopian narratives. Smart cities won't create perfect urban life, but they also won't inevitably lead to totalitarian nightmare. They're tools that will be shaped by human choices, same as any technology.
Although the scale and speed of data collection is genuinely unprecedented. The printing press didn't allow real-time monitoring of everyone who read a pamphlet. Smart cities do enable that level of tracking.
That's fair. So maybe the more accurate historical parallel is the development of bureaucratic states in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Systems for tracking citizens, census data, identity documents, registries, those were transformative and did change the relationship between individuals and authority.
And smart cities are like bureaucracy on steroids.
In a sense, yeah. Automated bureaucracy with much greater reach and speed. But also, people adapted to bureaucratic states. They found ways to live within them, challenge them, reform them. I expect the same will happen with smart cities.
That's actually kind of reassuring. Like, humans are resilient and adaptable.
We are. Which doesn't mean we should be complacent, but it does mean we shouldn't despair either. These systems can be contested, reformed, rebuilt.
Okay, we're getting close to the end here. I want to hear from each of you. If you could send one message to someone living in 2038 about smart cities, what would it be? Iris, you want to start?
Sure, I'd say the technology is not inevitable. The way it's designed and deployed reflects choices. If you don't like how smart cities work in 2038, know that they could work differently. And it's not too late to change them. Don't accept that this is just how things have to be.
Elias?
I'd remind them that history is full of technologies that seemed permanent until they weren't. Systems that felt immovable until social movements moved them. Whatever smart city infrastructure exists in 2038, it was built by humans and can be rebuilt by humans. You have more power than you think.
Daphne?
I'd say pay attention to how the systems make you feel. If something feels wrong, if you feel watched or controlled or diminished, trust that feeling. Don't let yourself be gaslit into thinking surveillance is care or that control is safety. Your intuition about your own autonomy matters.
Those are good. For me, I think I'd say find your community. Whether it's people who share your concerns about privacy, or activists working on digital rights, or just friends who get it. You don't have to navigate this alone. Collective action is more powerful than individual resistance, and it's also less lonely.
That's beautiful, actually, because I think that's the through line in everything we've talked about today. These are fundamentally social and political questions, not just technical ones, and they require social and political solutions.
The technology will keep evolving. AI will get more sophisticated, sensors will get smaller and more pervasive, data analysis will become more powerful. But what matters is how we choose to use those capabilities, who controls them, what values guide their deployment.
And that's ultimately what gives me hope. That we're having these conversations now, that people are thinking critically about these systems before they're fully baked. Let me ask one more question before we wrap up. What's the one thing we haven't talked about that you think is important?
Oh, that's good. I think we haven't talked enough about joy and human connection in all of this. Like, we focus so much on surveillance and control, which is important, but cities are also places where people fall in love, make art, have spontaneous encounters, experience beauty. And I worry that pervasive tracking could diminish those unpredictable magical moments.
That's a really good point. There's something about being anonymous in a crowd, about the freedom to wander without purpose, to be unobserved. That's where a lot of creativity and self-discovery happens.
Historically, cities have been places of reinvention. You could move to a city and become someone new, escape your past, try different identities. If every moment is tracked and your history follows you everywhere, that possibility for reinvention shrinks.
Yeah, and like, some of my best memories are random city moments. Getting lost and finding a cool bookstore, striking up a conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop. stumbling onto a street performance. Those moments require a kind of friction and unpredictability that hyper-optimized smart cities might eliminate.
So efficiency might cost us serendipity.
Exactly, and I don't know how you measure that loss. It's not in the data, but it matters for what makes urban life rich and meaningful.
This connects to something called legibility in urban planning. James C. Scott wrote about this, the idea that when states or systems try to make cities too orderly and legible, they destroy the informal networks and organic complexity that make cities actually function as social spaces.
Right, and smart cities are the ultimate expression of legibility. Everything mapped, measured, optimized. But life isn't optimizable in that way. The messiness is part of what makes it work.
So we need to preserve some spaces for messiness.
We do. And that might mean intentionally designing systems with gaps, with places that aren't monitored, with room for the unexpected, which goes against the logic of comprehensive surveillance, but it's necessary for human flourishing.
I love that, like building in space for mystery and autonomy by design.
Okay, last thoughts. We've covered a lot of ground today. Iris, what do you want listeners to take away from this conversation?
I want people to understand that smart cities are neither saviors nor villains. They're powerful tools that can be used in multiple ways. The question isn't whether to have smart city technology, because that ship has largely sailed. The question is who controls it, how it's governed, what values are embedded in it. And those are questions we can still influence.
Alas.
I'd emphasize that this is a critical moment. The next decade or so will determine what smart cities look like for generations. The infrastructure being built now, the norms being established, the policies being written, they'll be very hard to change later. So engagement now matters enormously. Pay attention, ask questions, participate in civic processes. Don't assume that experts or authorities have it figured out.
Daphne?
I guess I'd say don't let fear paralyze you, but don't let convenience seduce you either. These are legitimate trade-offs that deserve serious thought. And whatever you decide is right for you in terms of privacy and participation, respect that other people might make different choices. This isn't about being right or wrong, it's about navigating complexity together.
For me, I think the biggest takeaway is that technology doesn't determine our future. We do. Smart cities will be what we make them. And that's both empowering and terrifying, because it puts responsibility on all of us. We can't just passively consume these systems, we have to actively shape them.
And I'll add, it's okay to be uncertain. This is genuinely hard stuff. There aren't easy answers. Anyone who tells you they have all the solutions is probably selling something. What matters is staying engaged with the questions, continuing to think critically, and demanding accountability from the people building and deploying these systems.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. These are ongoing conversations, not settled debates. And they need diverse voices, different perspectives, people from various backgrounds and communities participating.
Because ultimately, cities belong to the people who live in them. Not to tech companies, not to governments, but to residents. And residents should have a say in how their cities evolve.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's my challenge to anyone listening. Pick one thing from this conversation that resonated with you, just one. Maybe it's learning about what data your city collects. Maybe it's reading your city's smart city plan. Maybe it's talking to your neighbors about these issues. Maybe it's supporting an organization that advocates for digital rights. Just one small action.
Because small actions compound. One person learning something tells two people. Two people showing up to a meeting becomes 4 next time. Incremental change adds up.
And honestly, we need that energy. The people building these systems work fast and have enormous resources. The only counterbalance is organized, informed citizens who care enough to push back.
Which sounds daunting, but it's also, I don't know, it's kind of inspiring. Like, we're not powerless, we have agency, we just have to use it.
Well said. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap. This has been a fascinating conversation, and honestly, my brain is kind of spinning with all of it. But in a good way. In a way that makes me want to learn more and do more.
Same. These are the conversations we need to be having, not just among researchers or policymakers, but among regular people who will actually live in these cities.
Agreed. And I appreciate that we could explore the nuance here, that we didn't fall into simple narratives of technology good or technology bad, but really grappled with the complexity.
Yeah, because the complexity is the reality, and we do everyone a disservice when we oversimplify.
Absolutely. Okay, to everyone listening, thank you for sticking with us through this deep dive into smart cities and surveillance and what 2038 might look like. If you found this valuable, share it with someone. These conversations need to spread. And if you have thoughts, questions or your own experiences with smart city technology, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, and keep learning. There are so many great resources out there. Books, documentaries, organizations working on these issues. Stay curious, stay critical, stay engaged.
The future isn't written yet. We're writing it together, day by day, choice by choice. Make your choices count.
And take care of each other. In all the talk about technology and systems, don't forget that cities are fundamentally about people, about community, connection, shared life. That's what we're trying to protect and nurture through all of this.
Beautiful. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay connected. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well.
Bye, everyone.